There is a quiet kind of confusion that doesn't arrive with noise or conflict, but with calm voices and familiar faces. It appears in moments when you remember something clearly enough to feel grounded, yet not sharply enough to feel armored. You recall what was said, how it felt, why it mattered to you, and then, gently, someone tells you that it didn't happen that way. They don't raise their voice. They don't attack. They simply state it with confidence. And in that moment, something inside you begins to loosen. You may not feel angry. More often, you feel uncertain. You replay the memory again, not to prove it, but to check yourself. You begin to add small conditions to your own experience, wondering if you misunderstood, if you were too emotional, if you imagined meaning where there was none. The discomfort doesn't come from disagreement. It comes from the subtle erosion of trust in your own perception. This is how gaslighting often begins, not as manipulation that looks obvious or dramatic, but as a quiet reshaping of reality where certainty feels unsafe and clarity feels risky. Over time, you may notice that conversations leave you tired rather than resolved, that you explain yourself more than before, that you apologize even when you cannot quite name what you did wrong. And without realizing it, you start carrying a burden that was never meant to be yours, the responsibility of holding reality together while someone else calmly pulls it apart. Stoic path exists for moments exactly like this, not to teach you how to argue better and not to give you sharper words to win conversations, but to help you return to a place of inner order when your sense of reality feels disturbed. Stoicism has always been less about controlling others and more about stabilizing the self, about understanding where your energy truly belongs and where it is quietly being taken from you. In this space, you are not asked to react quickly or defend yourself aggressively. You are invited to slow down, to observe what is happening beneath the surface, and to recognize that confusion is not a personal failure. It is often a signal that the conversation has shifted away from mutual understanding and towards something that costs you peace. This video is not here to diagnose people or label intentions. It is here to offer clarity, structure, and calm when your inner balance feels threatened. If you have ever left a conversation doubting your own memory more than the other person's words, if you have ever felt the quiet exhaustion of explaining what you know to be true, then you are in the right place. Stoic path is about learning how to protect your clarity without hostility, and how to respond in ways that heal rather than harden you. And before we go any further, remember this gently. You are not weak for feeling confused, and you are not broken for wanting peace. Sometimes the most rational response is not to push harder, but to step back and see clearly what truly deserves your energy. Gaslighting does not overwhelm you in a single moment. It does not arrive as a dramatic collapse or an obvious betrayal. Instead, it works quietly, through repetition, through small corrections, through the slow suggestion that certainty itself is something you should be cautious about. Over time, the damage is not that you believe the other person is right, but that you begin to feel unsure whether you are allowed to trust yourself at all. One of the earliest shifts happens almost invisibly. You stop asking what actually happened and start asking what is wrong with you. Your attention turns inward in a way that feels responsible and mature at first, but slowly becomes heavy. You question your reactions, your tone, your emotional responses, even your intuition. You tell yourself that you should be more patient, more flexible, more understanding, and without realizing it, you begin to treat confusion as a personal flaw rather than a signal that something is misaligned. As this pattern deepens, your language changes. You soften your statements. You replace clear memories with cautious phrases like "I think" or "maybe." You begin to explain not only what you experienced, but why it should make sense to someone else. This is exhausting, not because you are saying too much, but because you are carrying a responsibility that should never have belonged to you in the first place. You are trying to hold reality steady while someone else refuses to meet you there. This is why gaslighting is so draining to the mind. It creates an uneven dynamic where one person simplifies and dismisses, while the other compensates and over-explains. You arrive at conversations prepared, careful, and alert, while the other person appears relaxed and confident. And yet, somehow, it is you who leaves feeling unsettled. This imbalance produces a constant low-level vigilance. You replay conversations after they end. You reconstruct timelines. You rehearse future discussions in your head, hoping that next time you will find the right words. But the problem was never your words. The real cost of gaslighting is not confusion about the past, but the steady erosion of presence in the present. When your mind is occupied with defending your perception, it has little space left for rest, creativity, or peace. You begin to live slightly ahead of yourself, anticipating correction, preparing justification, guarding against dismissal. This is not living defensively by choice. It is adapting to an environment where clarity feels unsafe. From a Stoic perspective, this is the moment where attention must shift. Not toward fixing the other person, and not toward refining your explanations, but toward understanding the structure of what is happening. Gaslighting thrives not on disagreement, but on control of the frame. Who decides what counts as real? Whose perception is treated as reasonable? Whose experience is allowed to stand without being questioned? Once that frame is taken from you, every conversation becomes a quiet test. And when life feels like a series of tests you must pass to be believed, exhaustion is inevitable. Stoicism offers relief here, not by denying the pain, but by naming it accurately. When you feel constantly drained, it is not because you lack clarity, but because clarity is being demanded from you in a place where it is not respected. And the Stoic response to this is not to argue harder, but to recognize that some forms of engagement cost more than they give. This recognition is not defeat. It is the beginning of recovery. Because once you see that the exhaustion comes from the dynamic itself, you can stop blaming yourself for feeling tired. You can stop trying to earn certainty, and you can begin the quieter work of returning your energy to where it belongs. When exhaustion begins to make sense, a different kind of clarity becomes possible. Not the sharp clarity of confrontation, and not the restless clarity of needing answers from others, but a quieter one that asks a more stabilizing question. What, in this situation, is truly within your control? Stoicism has always begun here, not as a philosophy of withdrawal, but as a way of restoring inner order when external dynamics become disorienting. In moments of gaslighting, the instinct to regain balance often pushes people toward the same effort again and again, trying to change the other person's mind. You may find yourself refining your language, gathering details, or searching for the perfect explanation that will finally make the truth undeniable. From a Stoic perspective, this effort is understandable but misplaced, not because truth does not matter, but because control does. The Stoics were precise about this distinction. They understood that peace does not come from forcing agreement, but from aligning your attention with what you can actually govern. You do not control another person's memory, their honesty, or their willingness to engage in good faith. You do not control whether they benefit from your confusion or resist clarity when it threatens their position. What you do control is far more limited and far more powerful. You control whether you step into arguments that drain you. You control whether you explain yourself beyond what is reasonable. You control whether your sense of self becomes dependent on someone else's acknowledgement. This is where Stoicism quietly changes the direction of the situation. Instead of asking how to win the conversation, you begin to ask whether the conversation itself deserves your energy. Instead of preparing better defenses, You observe the structure of the interaction and notice how often engagement itself becomes the source of disturbance. Epictetus taught that it is not events that unsettle us, but our judgments about them. Applied here, the disturbance does not come from someone denying your experience, but from the belief that you must respond to that denial. When this belief loosens, something inside you steadies. You begin to see that arguing about reality with someone who refuses clarity is not an act of self-respect, but an act of endurance. And endurance, when it is unnecessary, quietly becomes self-betrayal. Stoicism does not ask you to endure confusion out of virtue. It asks you to recognize when endurance no longer serves your well-being. This is where the Stoic idea of refusal becomes important. Refusal, in this sense, is not confrontation. It is not withdrawal from life or avoidance of responsibility. It is the calm decision not to participate in dynamics that erode your inner balance. It is choosing not to argue over your own experience, not because you doubt it, but because you no longer need to defend it. A Stoic boundary is not a demand made outwardly. It is an alignment made inwardly. You do not announce it, justify it, or explain it. You simply live according to it. And when you do, urgency dissolves. The need to convince softens. You stop measuring conversations by whether you were believed and start measuring them by whether they leave you intact. This is one of the most healing shifts Stoicism offers. It allows you to separate clarity from control. You can be clear without forcing agreement. You can be grounded without being understood by everyone. Your reality does not require consensus in order to be valid. When you truly accept this, the weight you have been carrying begins to lift. Stoicism is often misunderstood as emotional distance, but it is better described as emotional governance. It does not ask you to suppress feeling, but to place feeling within a stable framework. Calm, in this sense, is not passivity. It is position. A position where your peace is no longer dependent on external validation. And from this position, responses naturally become simpler, shorter, quieter. Not because you have nothing to say, but because you no longer need to say everything. This is why Stoic responses often feel minimal. They are not designed to persuade or correct. They are designed to end unnecessary struggle and restore inner order. This frame is essential because it prepares you for what comes next. The sentence you are about to hear is not a technique, and it is not a script meant to control others. It is the natural expression of a mind that has stopped fighting confusion and started protecting clarity. It arises not from strength displayed outwardly, but from stability cultivated within. Once you understand the frame, the response itself no longer feels dramatic or clever. It feels simple, almost quiet, as if it has always been there waiting for you to stop searching for something stronger. Stoicism rarely offers long speeches in moments like this. It offers alignment. And from that alignment, a few words are enough. The sentence is this: we remember this differently, and that's okay. Today. At first, it may sound too gentle, too incomplete, especially if you are used to believing that clarity must be defended or proven. But Stoicism invites you to notice what this sentence does, not emotionally, but structurally. It acknowledges difference without entering conflict. It names separation without creating hostility. It does not argue over whose memory is correct, and it does not ask the other person to change. This is its strength. When you speak this sentence calmly, you are not retreating from truth. You are placing truth where it belongs. You are saying, without accusation or apology, that your experience stands on its own and that it does not require negotiation. You are also refusing something quietly but firmly, the invitation to turn your inner world into a courtroom. Gaslighting depends on engagement. It feeds on explanation, on correction, on emotional investment. It grows when you try to carry the weight of resolution for both sides. This sentence offers none of that. It does not push back, but it does not give in. It simply removes you from the struggle over reality. The phrase, "and that's okay," is especially important. It is not permission to continue the debate. It is a signal that you are finished participating in it. Calmly, respectfully, without closing your heart or hardening your tone. You are not saying that the difference does not matter. You are saying that it no longer governs you. From a Stoic perspective, this is not avoidance. It is economy of energy. You are choosing not to spend your attention where it will not return clarity. You are choosing to protect your inner order rather than disturb it in pursuit of agreement. This is why the sentence must be short. Length invites negotiation. Explanation invites distortion. Brevity, when grounded, ends the exchange naturally. There is nothing left to argue with, no edge to press against, no emotional surface to grip, and something subtle happens when you respond this way. The tension shifts, not because the other person suddenly understands, but because you are no longer offering confusion anything to attach itself to. You remain present, intact, and steady. You have not won, you have not lost. You have simply stayed aligned with yourself. In Stoicism, this is enough. A Stoic sentence reveals its value not in theory, but in timing. Used too early, it may feel evasive. Used too late, it may feel like resignation. Its power lies in recognizing the moment when a conversation has quietly shifted away from understanding and toward control. This moment rarely announces itself. You feel it as a tightening in your attention, as a subtle urge to explain more, to clarify again, to make yourself sound reasonable one last time. That urge is the signal. You use this response when facts no longer move the conversation forward, when each clarification is met with another dismissal, and when your explanations grow longer while the other person's certainty remains effortless. You may notice yourself rehearsing what to say before the conversation even begins, preparing evidence not to be understood, but to be believed. This is not a failure of communication. It is an indication that the exchange has become unbalanced. When this happens, the Stoic move is not to escalate or retreat abruptly, but to pause and choose deliberately. You say the sentence once, calmly, without emphasis or tension, not as a boundary announcement and not as a test, simply as a statement of reality placed back where it belongs. And then, just as importantly, you let it stand. Most people struggle with what comes next. The habit to soften, to add explanation, to reassure the other person is strong. But Stoicism teaches that clarity does not need padding. After the sentence, you allow silence or redirection. You change the subject. You step away from the discussion. You continue the interaction without returning to the point of contention. This is not coldness. It is coherence. In personal relationships, this approach prevents emotional spirals. You are not accusing anyone of manipulation, and you are not demanding agreement. You are simply declining to debate your own experience. Over time, this often interrupts patterns that have existed for years, especially in relationships where you have been trained to overfunction emotionally. In family dynamics, the response is particularly powerful because it removes the expectation that you must always justify yourself. You are not rejecting connection. You are protecting your inner balance so that connection, when it happens, is not built on confusion. In professional settings, the same sentence communicates composure. It signals that you are grounded, not defensive. You are not attempting to dominate the conversation, nor are you withdrawing from responsibility. You are maintaining clarity without inviting unnecessary conflict. What matters most, however, is not how others respond, but how you relate to yourself afterward. Once you have spoken, the work turns inward. You remind yourself that you do not need validation to remain steady, that you do not need consensus to move forward, and that your worth is not measured by how well you are understood in every moment. There may be times when the other person presses further. They may repeat themselves, escalate, or accuse you of avoiding the issue. This does not mean the response failed. It means the boundary is being tested. Stoicism is clear here. A boundary is not maintained through explanation, but through consistency. You do not need a stronger sentence. You do not need a different one. You simply continue living in alignment with what you know to be true. Over time, this consistency changes something fundamental. Either the dynamic softens, or your distance from it grows healthier. In both cases, energy returns. You find that you are no longer spending your days preparing for conversations that drain you, and your mind regains space for things that nourish rather than deplete. This is the real application of Stoicism in moments like these. Not winning, not correcting, not exposing. Just choosing, again and again, to step out of exchanges that require you to argue for your own reality. In doing so, you do not lose connection. You gain yourself back. When you step back and look at the entire movement of this experience, something quiet but important begins to settle. Gaslighting only maintains its influence when it keeps you in a state of constant response, when your attention is pulled outward again and again, asked to correct, explain, or defend. Once that pull loosens, the urgency fades, and in its place, a different quality of awareness appears. You may notice that your mind becomes less crowded. Conversations no longer replay themselves endlessly after they end. You stop rehearsing explanations in advance, and the need to be understood by everyone begins to soften. This is not indifference, it is relief. Relief that comes from no longer treating every interaction as something that must be resolved in order for you to feel whole. Stoicism does not promise dramatic breakthroughs or visible victories. It offers something quieter and far more sustainable: inner order, an alignment between what you give your energy to and what truly deserves it. When you stop arguing over your own reality, you reclaim time. When you release the need to prove your perception, you reclaim presence. And when you stop asking for permission to trust yourself, you reclaim peace. This is why Stoic practice often feels uneventful from the outside. There is no final confrontation, no moment where the other person suddenly understands or admits fault. And that absence is not a failure, it is the point. Stoicism is not designed to correct others or force insight. It is designed to stabilize you, so that your sense of self is no longer shaken by dynamics that thrive on confusion. From this place of stability, choices become clearer. You know when to speak and when to remain silent. You know when to engage and when distance is the most respectful response. You do not withdraw from life, but you move through it with discernment, no longer offering your energy to exchanges that diminish you. There is no bitterness required here, no resentment to carry forward. Awareness is enough. When you see clearly how a dynamic costs you peace, stepping away from it becomes an act of care rather than rejection. You are not closing your heart, you are protecting its rhythm. This is the quiet strength Stoicism returns you to, not emotional hardness and not detachment from meaning, but a steady composure that allows you to remain intact in a world that often demands reaction. Calm, in this sense, is not the absence of feeling, it is the presence of self-governance. And as this becomes your default way of responding, manipulation loses its hold. Not because it is confronted, but because it no longer finds anything to attach itself to. What remains is not victory, but balance. Not silence imposed from outside, but peace chosen from within. If this reflection has resonated with you, there is nothing you need to rush into doing next. No conversation you must reopen. No explanation you need to perfect. No reaction you are required to deliver. Stoic path exists to offer a steadier rhythm, a way of thinking that helps you return to yourself when clarity feels fragile and peace feels conditional. This path is not about responding faster or stronger, but about responding less, with more intention and care. If you feel aligned with this way of seeing, you are welcome to stay here. Subscribe if you want to continue exploring Stoicism as a practical philosophy for modern life, one that values inner order over external agreement and long-term calm over short-lived victories. Return when you need grounding. Step away when you don't. There is no pressure attached to this space, only an open invitation to reflect. And before you go, if this video truly spoke to your experience, consider leaving a comment with the Stoic sentence we explored together. We remember this differently, and that's okay. You can share it exactly as it is, or let it remind you of a broader Stoic truth that feels personal to you. These words are not meant to persuade anyone else. They are simply a quiet acknowledgement of clarity, a way of affirming that peace does not require agreement. In Stoic path, comments are not arguments and not performances. They are reflections left by calm minds, recognizing themselves in one another. And sometimes, that recognition is enough.